Individual demand, part of our Week 2 lectures on demand. In this video, we're going to talk about where consumer demand comes from and the different ways in which we look at a consumer's demand. Now, before we start talking about demand, I want to talk about some of the precursors that are required for there to be a market. And for a market, for a good or service to form, there has to be a desire or need for that good. And I have an example for you from about 15 years ago. About 15 years ago, there was a product that was launched, and that was Cheetos flavored lip balm. This was not a huge hit, as you might imagine. So there was really no one who wanted this market, this product, and it did not sell a lot of units. And there was really no market for Cheetos lip balm. I guess that's probably a good thing. So I'm saying this to make sure you understand that for a market to form, there has to be some sort of demand. So in our class, we're always going to assume that there's someone out there that wants a good. Now, why do they want this good? They want this good because they have preferences. All of us have preferences. All of us have the idea of what we want and what we'd want to have. Here you see two different gift boxes, and you'll see that there are two different choices on the stuff that you could get in the gift boxes. And I imagine that if you looked at this for a few seconds, you would decide whether you wanted the gift box that's on the left or the gift box that's on the right. I think most students choose the one on the right, but it's not 100%. It's like 1/3 will choose the ones on the left and 2/3 will choose the ones on the right. And that just illustrates that we all have different preferences. And the preferences are really what we're trying to get at when we look at the model of consumer behavior. We're trying to uncover people's preferences. Now, your preferences are always sort of more. And so preferences have nothing to do with cost. You might prefer to buy a really expensive sports car rather than a cheaper car. That's your preference. Now, again, it has nothing to do with cost, and so you might not actually buy that expensive sports car, but that's the one that you would prefer given your preferences. And the way I want to associate that each different consumer has their own preference is through a comic strip from The Amazing Spider-Man, where Spider-Man in the bottom left-hand corner is confronting some sort of pterodactyl monster creature, and Spider-Man says, you can rewrite DNA on the fly, and you're using it to turn people into dinosaurs, but with tech like that, you could cure cancer. And the dinosaur man says, but I don't want to cure cancer. I want to turn people into dinosaurs. That's his preference, or I guess her preference. I'm pretty sure his preference. So his preference is for turning people into dinosaurs, and that's not really something we can change easily, and not something Spider-Man can just mandate that everyone's preference is to cure cancer. Now, if there's not a constraint on anyone's preferences, there's not really anything useful we can say, because in most cases, people want more of everything. If money was not an object, you might want to have 12 houses. You might want to own 3 planes. You might want to own, 12 warehouses full of clothes, whatever it is. So preferences by themselves aren't very helpful for us to figure out what decisions people actually make. And we can't really just accurately model behavior by knowing what people's preferences are. Instead, we need to know what their constraints are as well. And the constraint that we are usually confronted with as consumers is the constraint of money. There's another constraint that's almost as important, the constraint of time, but the constraint of money is the most important, the most often holding constraint. The thing that's holding us back more often than not is lack of money. So the two constraints, time and money, are really the constraints that we talk about. So what we do as economists is we model the consumer trying to optimize. That is, trying to put their money to the best possible use, trying to buy the things that make them, we're going to use a very rough term here, happy. By considering the amount they want to buy, the amount that would make them the happiest, in light of the prices of the goods and how much money they have to spend. And that's how we come up with our consumer model. Now in this class, we call that the consumer's demand. The demand of a consumer is what they want to buy given the constraints that they have. Now, I just defined a term called the consumer's demand. And I want to be very careful about two different terms that sound like they mean the same thing. A consumer's demand is what they want to buy for the whole range of prices. But if we have a specific price in mind, that's the consumer's quantity demanded, the amount the consumer would buy at an exact price. So a change in the price of a good changes the quantity demanded by that consumer, but does not change the demand of that consumer because the entire demand profile is over all the possible prices of that good. So if you think about a lot of different prices of a good, we can come up with what we call a demand schedule. And this is a made-up demand for a Brandeis branded notebook. And this is one consumer's demand for Brandeis notebooks. And what you'll see here is what we call a demand schedule, that for several different prices, the quantity this student demands based on those prices. So for example, if the price for this notebook is $12, this person's not going to want to buy any notebooks. But if the price were $10, the person would purchase one notebook. And we can just keep having these tables like this that would show us the quantity demanded by this consumer based on a certain price. And that's what we call a demand schedule. This way, we get the individual's quantity demanded. A quick note that in our consumer model, a consumer can't spend more than they have. Now, we know that's not true in real life. In real life, people can take out credit cards and personal loans and do all sorts of other things to get themselves more money in the immediate moment, but that's going to complicate our model somewhat. So we're going to say that a person is absolutely constrained by the amount of money they have. They can't borrow more or get more from a friend. This is the money that they have. So I have a question for you here. How many notebooks would the consumer buy if the market price is $8 per notebook? And you can think of that for 3 seconds before I tell you that's going to be 2 notebooks. How many notebooks would the consumer buy if the market price is $6 per notebook? You can see that here that would be 3 notebooks. How about $5 per notebook? If the market price was $5 per notebook, would the consumer buy 3 notebooks or 4 notebooks? This is going to require a little bit of thinking maybe on your part, so I'm going to give you about 8 seconds on this. So if the market price is $5 per notebook, the consumer goes to sort of the next highest price. So the consumer would buy 3 notebooks in this situation, because it's only when the price gets to $4 that the consumer would buy 4 notebooks. So in this case, if the market price were $5 per notebook, the consumer would demand 3 notebooks. Now, I'm making an important assumption here. The important assumption I'm making is that the consumer cannot buy fractional notebooks, right? If the consumer could buy half a notebook, what we see here is that in a market price of 5, given that this is all consistent, this is all the same pattern that we're seeing, if the market price were $5, the consumer would buy 3.5 notebooks, right? And so sometimes we say in this class that half notebooks are not possible, that fractional amounts of the good are not possible. And sometimes we say that fractional amounts of the good are possible. And so this is how we get to different demand. It really depends on the good and what we're trying to say. So it could be that if there are no half notebooks, that the consumer would buy 3 notebooks. But if there are half notebooks available, you know, if the person split the notebook with a friend, or they just sort of rip the notebook in half, or you know, there's another notebook half the price and half the size. These are all options for having fractional notebooks. That's where I'd like to end this video, that demands start from preferences. Preferences that are combined with constraints, and this generates a consumer's demand. This demand can be detailed with a demand schedule, and we'll talk about some other ways to look at consumer demand shortly. Thank you.